Hello, welcome to week 8. So we're nearing the finish line. So to let you know, the uh, assignment to show a sitemap, show a wireframe, and build out a scenario or scenarios or storyboards is due at the end of the week. So we've made it pretty far. We've also done a lot of terrific collaboration, which is my goal for using Murally. And thanks to everyone. If I'm not going to thank you personally, I know that there's been a lot of help from people that are more experienced to people that are less experienced, and that is absolutely the goal here. I want to reiterate that the judging of quality in my mind is based on thought, not necessarily technique. So if you put a lot of thought into something, I will reward that. And if I feel as though thought was spent in maybe the wrong places, I am attempting to focus you on the things that are important. So let me just go review quickly. We're in week 6 here, looking at navigation, and that's really about naming conventions, taxonomies, the work that we were doing of how do we organize things at a high enough level, but also a manageable level. So web navigation and so forth is got to be pretty brief and to the point. You can't necessarily have the Yahoo homepage anymore. For those who might not remember that, it used to be a big long list of links. And that was great in the 90s, but now we look toward more sophisticated ways to be able to manage content so that users can quickly and easily find what they're looking for. So this is about that thought. That'll be the first page, so to speak, in your deliverable, is to talk about the sitemap and how you organize the content. If we go to this week, week 7, we wanted to introduce the idea of wireframing, which may or may not have been challenging to people. Wireframing, to me, as I said, you could use a piece of paper if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter the tools. It's really about showing your content in a visual arrangement. If you think back to our work with Gestalt theory, it's about how do you arrange things to show hierarchy. How do you repeat things? Because we're talking about a repeatable container, perhaps, so that you might want to use some of those thoughts that we explored last week in what are content containers. And at the moment, I'm really just interested in maybe a couple of views. One view might be, say, a list view, where someone sees a list and maybe manipulates that list through your navigation. And secondly, perhaps a detail view, if you wanted to see more, which many people do. So that's a pretty common flow, is I want to see a list of things, choose from that list, and see more. So that's pretty common, and that's what I'm looking for. If I have not given you individual feedback on each of your approaches and wireframes, I will. I actually, again, really appreciated that everybody was helping each other with this. I'm not too particularly concerned. I can figure it out based on the screen size, what the experience would be, but right now we're a bit agnostic. Mobile just might be easier because they're smaller, and desktop might be harder because there's so many different states. I do, however, want to reiterate that this is not the time for placeholder text. If anything, the job of an IA is to understand the content and to mark up the content that they have and demonstrate to everyone like how this works. So there's really, if you're a designer, sometimes you can get away with lorem ipsum, but not an information architect. So FYI, please revise these with real content. That's what I'm looking for. So yes, great job this week, and I will definitely try to give everybody feedback if they haven't gotten enough already. If you've gotten feedback and not responded to it, please do. The whole goal of here is to post early, learn, repeat. I understand this class might be time-consuming. At the end, very closely, we'll have our evaluations, and please leave me that comment if you feel that you're being overworked or that this is too challenging. I'm more than happy to hear that. I actually extended out this project from the last time an extra week so that we did not rush through some of these important areas. So it's actually been almost 4 weeks since we've done a deliverable, and I know this is a bigger deliverable. It's 30 points. So I wanted to make sure there's enough time to get a lot of feedback so that there's no surprises when it comes to the evaluation. And that leaves this week. So this week is pretty simple. It's just to create some kind of a narrative And so the point of a narrative is to take your sitemap and just kind of more sequence it out. And one way I'd like you to try to understand, we call these flows. Um, we talk a little bit about flows and how things flow from one to the other. So what I'm really interested in is to slow things down from a user perspective, show them selecting something, show the next state, the next state, and the next state. And this is why a program such as Figma or some kind of drawing program might come in handy, because you're going to do a lot of repetition. And having something and just copying and pasting it is a lot easier than drawing it or redrawing it. But as I said, I'm not really here to talk about tools. This isn't, it's not, I mean, we're at the fidelity level that we're not really doing much more than text and boxes and arrows. There was a little sidebar last week, if you didn't notice, about what is clickable, and I am interested in that. So I do need to know, how does somebody know that you can select something or not select something? When I start to see, or anyone else starts to see, like, how did that happen? And that's really why it's called a storyboard. If something happens and it just seems incongruous, or how did the user understand that? That's what we're going to point out, and that's what we want to repair. So one thing I want you to understand, flows are a little bit difficult to imagine. You are always, they call it web surfing for a reason, because you feel like you're kind of surfing, I guess. But I think there's a really great tool here. It's called IFTTT. I would use it on mobile. I think that we did learn that the desktop version might be a little bit much, but I think either is fine. But IFTTT is just a really very, very clever example of how to demonstrate how computers really function. Computers are stupid, so let's just remember that. Like, they don't do anything that they aren't programmed to do. And so to program a computer might be challenging for many people. So you have to actually set up statements and try to understand, if something happens, then something else happens. Well, guess what? IFTTT means if this, then that. There we go. I almost got it right. So what they do is do a few things. For one, they show you, I think we can probably skip how they set you up, but they do a really good job of basically explaining how to create what they call a recipe, which is another fantastic idea. Like, let's call it something that isn't intimidating. It really is a recipe for how you teach a computer to react to events. So I'm using it here. I want everybody to sign up and create a recipe and use this to learn how they do flows. They just do a really nice job. I think that they really thought through what is potentially an extremely complex situation and made it easy, occasionally made it fun, made it understandable how that this is helpful to you. They do a lot that I think is great. So this is my example. If you have other examples of places that you think, just let me know or post it somewhere else in the mural. But I think IFTTT is just a really brilliant flow example of what that means. So when you do your wireframes, you'll do the same as last week. You'll post them here, post them as pictures. There is also a little bit of flow diagramming, which I think could be helpful to start with if you want to post that first before you get your actual wireframes to fit. Many of you have already done that, but this sort of word nomenclature that they came up with at 37 Signals, I'm a big fan of. I think it's pretty easy, quick to get your thoughts out before you get into the hard job of figuring out what people see and do. So this might be considered another map of sorts, but what we're taking is, and the goal of this week is just take one flow, a successful flow. You might also want to think about error flows a little bit. That would be extra points, because sometimes people make mistakes, and recovering from mistakes is a big job of how thinking of these flows work. If you only have one flow and that's all you can do through your application, I'm not going to count that very highly, because that's not realistic. People like freedom to do things. So if it's just next, 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 that is not really, to me, a flow. Okay, so flow is just being able to navigate freely, reacting to the content, being able to back out of a decision, so on and so forth. So think of that, how people might get through using your interface. And that is your final deliverable, to show all three: the map, the wireframe how your content is arranged in that sort of master detailed view, and then finally a flow using that format. You're able at this point to revise any of those if you wish, if you want to get them all to match up nicely together. I know we started with some ambitious mapping. We might want to tone that down a little bit and be more focused. So if any of you are fans of Top Chef, there's the idea of doing a very complex recipe and not doing it very well can get you voted off. So try to keep it simple. Keep it simple and basic. That usually is the best approach. Simple, basic, straightforward, and post early so we can get feedback before the final due date, which is this Sunday. So good luck for this week. Contact me, or actually please just post on Mural. I look at everything and respond to as much as I can, and so does everyone else, so that's perfect. Cheers.